Welcome to the deep dive. If you've been looking at the headlines from, Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, even the Fed, the consensus forecast for 2026 it sounds almost boringly optimistic.
It does.
We're hearing about a soft landing, inflation is moderating, and maybe even sustained U.S. growth around 2.5%. It really points toward this smooth, sort of Goldilocks environment.
That is the beautiful, reassuring facade. But if you actually read the fine print in those same reports, especially the global economic risk analysis we've been looking at, you realize that surface stability is built on some incredibly fragile foundations.
So the market is pricing in perfection.
Totally. It's pricing in perfection and just ignoring these huge structural risks that are multiplying right beneath the surface.
Okay, so our mission today is to give you that shortcut to understand those hidden risks, why the consensus might be mispriced, and why the stability is really, as the analysts call it, fragility disguised as stability.
And to do that, we have to start with their central metaphor, the Janus economy.
I like this one.
It's a powerful image. Janus, the Roman god, had two faces, right? Looking forward and backward at the same time.
And the global economy is doing the exact same thing.
Exactly. It's presenting this wildly optimistic face and a deeply pessimistic one simultaneously.
So let's define those faces. The forward-looking one, the hopeful one. That's all about technology, right? Artificial intelligence.
All AI. It sees massive productivity gains, vast new pools of wealth, a huge surge in capital expenditure driving all the growth. That's the good face.
And the backward-looking face.
That's the dark side. It sees this entrenched geopolitical fracturing, the breakdown of trade efficiency, the rise of, explicit protectionism, and a ticking time bomb of structural debt that's about to mature at these punishingly high rates.
And the challenge for 2026 is that the forward face is giving us the nice headline GDP numbers.
Well, the backward face is setting up the conditions for an eventual and potentially severe crash.
Okay, let's start with that forward-facing economy then, specifically the U.S., because that's the core of all the optimism. U.S. GDP growth looks robust, but you're arguing, based on the sources, that this strength is synthetic. Why?
It's not a classic cyclical recovery. It's being propped up by two major non-organic pillars. First, you still have the massive fiscal momentum from government spending. The sources jokingly call it the one big beautiful bill effect.
Right.
And second, you have this unprecedented surge in capital expenditure that's focused purely on AI infrastructure.
So the growth is real, but how we're getting it is unusual, and maybe more importantly, it's not leading to broad-based economic health.
Exactly.
And this brings us to what you call the first major fragility, the decoupling of corporate prosperity from labor health.
Precisely. We're seeing what analysts are calling jobless growth, or a capital deepening economy.
What does that mean, capital deepening?
It means instead of a company hiring 5 new people to increase its output, it's investing millions in software, in automation, in AI models to get that same output with fewer people. The investment is prioritizing tech over headcount.
And you can really see that structural shift in the labor data. People hear record employment, but when you dive into the numbers, you see some serious softness under the surface, especially for white-collar jobs.
That's right. Just look at manufacturing. It's supposed to be a bellwether, right? Despite all the talk about reshoring, it's shed jobs for 8 straight months. Over 72,000 positions gone since last spring.
Wow.
And the public sector is contracting sharply, too. Federal employment is down 9.2% since early 2025. That's a loss of 277,000 jobs.
That's significant austerity. And this creates that weird, painful feeling for so many people, the vibe session.
Exactly.
The charts say the economy is growing, but they don't feel it. Not in their bank account, not in their job security.
And that feeling is entirely rational. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index is at 54.0. Historically, that's a recessionary level.
But we have positive GDP.
We do. And the core issue is the legacy of inflation. We've managed to slow price growth, sure, but the prices themselves have permanently reset 20, maybe 25% higher than they were in 2020. That permanent hit to your purchasing power is what the bottom 80% are struggling with.
And the high GDP numbers are basically hiding this massive inequality.
They're being completely masked by the top 20% of earners. They're insulated by asset prices, by the tech boom, and they now account for a record 57% of all consumption.
57%.
They're the only ones spending aggressively enough to keep that GDP engine running, and that creates a severe K-shaped recovery. That divergence is the first face of fragility in this Janus economy.
Okay, let's pivot back to AI because that feels like the second enormous element of fragility, the risk in the tech boom itself. We keep hearing comparisons to the dot-com bubble in 2000. Is this a bubble or is it a genuine utility build-out?
Well, it's more nuanced than 2000, and that nuance is, what makes it so dangerous. Back in 2000, you had a forward price-to-earnings ratio of, 55 times?
It's insane.
Fueled by highly speculative debt going into companies with little to no revenue.
And today?
Today, the forward PE for tech is around 30. Still high, but the sources point out this crucial difference. The current boom is largely self-funded.
Meaning what?
The hyperscalers, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they're using their own massive free cash flow, their own capital, to build out data centers. This reduces their immediate vulnerability to interest rate hikes, which is what destroyed the debt structure of 2000.
So if it's safer in terms of that immediate financial structure, where does the bubble risk lie now?
It shifts. It shifts to the sheer scale of the investment and what they call the return on investment gap, the ROI gap.
Okay.
We're talking about north of $400 billion in data center capex being deployed globally.
400 billion, that number is just staggering. It means whole industrial sectors are now dependent on that money flowing.
Exactly. And Northern Trust raises the alarm here. They say if the AI applications, the actual monetization, the efficiency gains that were promised, if they fail to show up on a corporate level by late 2026, the entire CapEx cycle just stops, dead.
And that would trigger an immediate sharp recession in semiconductors, industrial equipment, construction.
Globally. So you're saying the risk isn't a stock collapse like 2000, but a sudden stop in the physical economy that's been built to support AI.
It's a different kind of cyclical risk, and we can't ignore the concentration risk either. I mean, if all this growth depends on these AI giants, you have to remember the U.S. high-tech sector is now almost 40% of the S&P 500's total weight.
That is a historically high level of concentration.
If just a few of those companies falter because of that ROI gap, the entire market gets dragged down immediately.
And that brings us back to valuation. Because while the forward PE looks better than 2000, the broader metric still looks terrifying.
You mean the Shiller-Capey ratio?
The Shiller-Capey, yeah, the cyclically adjusted PE. It's a much better warning signal because it smooths out earnings over 10 years. It takes the current hype cycle out of the equation.
And right now it's sitting at?
It's at 40.6.
Yeah.
To put that in perspective for you, that is the second highest level in 155 years.
Second highest ever.
Only topped by the absolute peak of the dot-com bubble itself. It's basically screaming, caution is warranted.
So the forward face of technology is built on this magnificent promise, but it's a promise that demands a return on a $400 billion gamble within the next 2 years.
And if that gamble fails, the forward face collapses, and that's when it exposes all the fragilities of the backward face.
Let's turn to that backward face now.
Yeah.
Geopolitical fragmentation. Fragility number 3. The sources call this new environment not globalization, but re-globalization. What does that mean in practical terms?
It just means there's been a fundamental shift in what drives international commerce. For decades, trade was all about efficiency, low cost. Now, it is being explicitly rewired for national security and resilience. And the result is the normalization of tariffs and protectionism.
And that normalization structurally ensures that goods just cost more. The average effective tariff on U.S. imports is already over 11%.
It's the highest it's been since the 1940s, and it acts as a structural floor under inflation. But the immediate high volatility threat here isn't the slow rise of tariffs, it's the specific flashpoint around Iran.
The U.S. administration's threat, a massive 25% tariff on any country that continues to trade with Iran.
That is the ultimate gray swan event hanging over the first quarter of 2026. Because that measure directly threatens the current, extremely fragile trade truce between the U.S. and China.
Because China is the single largest buyer of Iranian oil.
The largest. If the U.S. enforces those secondary sanctions on Chinese companies, the current détente just it collapses instantly.
And China's retaliation would be immediate, and they'd leverage their dominance in the supply chain.
Absolutely. The likely response is they'd reinstate the bans on critical rare earth minerals, materials like gallium, germanium.
The things you need for semiconductors and defense production.
The essentials. And if that happens, you have a severe manufactured supply chain break that markets are not even remotely pricing in right now. That leads to geopolitical stagflation.
And it's not just China, is it? Those secondary sanctions cause deep collateral damage. They alienate key allies like India and Turkey.
Right, they're also facing that potential 25% tariff wall for engaging with Iran.
And if they face that wall, the economic incentive shifts completely.
It pushes them further into the geopolitical orbit of the BRICS economic sphere. We're not just talking about a trade skirmish here. We're talking about the effective bifurcation of the global trading system based on security alignment. And that ultimately just limits productivity for everyone.
It sounds like an economic time machine, just unwinding decades of efficiency. Okay, fragility number 4, the financial cracks, starting with the corporate debt maturity wall.
This is a silent crisis that's been building since the era of zero interest rates. In 2026, corporations are facing nearly $3 trillion in debt maturities.
3 trillion.
And this is debt that was happily issued at interest rates between, say, 3 and 4%.
Now they have to roll it over, refinance it at current rates, which are north of 7, maybe even 9% for high-yield issuers.
That refinancing shock it's an existential threat for a lot of these companies. I mean, think about it. Your interest expense of $30 million a year suddenly becomes $90 million. It instantly makes you unprofitable.
Which forces the risk out of the regulated banking system and into the opaque world of private credit.
The $3 trillion private credit black box. This is where the risk gets truly hidden.
Why is this sector so alarming to analysts?
Because the standard tools of transparency just don't apply. And they're increasingly using these complex structures to mask actual distress. The key mechanism to watch for is the payment in kind structure, PIK.
Wait, explain that PIK structure again. How does that mask defaults?
It's an extend and pretend strategy.
Yeah.
So instead of a struggling borrower paying their interest with cash, the lender allows them to pay the interest with more debt.
With more debt.
Yes. They just add the interest payment to the principal balance. The company avoids a cash default, but its underlying debt load just spirals higher and higher. Some analysts estimate the true underlying default rate is closer to 5%, much higher than the headline figures.
That sounds like a liquidity time bomb. And this bomb is being sold to unsuspecting investors.
That's the second dangerous layer. The retailization of these illiquid private funds. Pension funds, retail investors, they're being sold these funds expecting the kind of liquidity they get from stocks or bonds.
But it's not there.
It's not there. And if sentiment shifts and too many investors try to pull their money out at once, that liquidity mismatch could trigger a severe market freeze. It could shut down non-bank lending.
A perfect storm. Let's quickly look at Europe because the sovereign risk focus seems to be shifting from Italy and toward France.
France is now the Eurozone's new sick man, fiscally speaking. Their budget deficit is forecast to stay high at 5% of GDP, well above the EU's 3% limit. Their debt to GDP is projected to hit 120% by 2027.
And the political paralysis makes resolving it almost impossible.
Exactly. The government doesn't have the parliamentary majority to pass the necessary unpopular austerity measures. The bond market is noticing this. We're seeing a structural widening of the OAT bond spread.
The difference between French and German borrowing costs.
Right. It means investors are actively repricing French sovereign risk. And that could seriously test Eurozone cohesion.
And finally, Japan. The Bank of Japan is finally normalizing rates, which threatens to unwind the yen carry trade.
The yen carry trade has been running for decades. Japanese institutions borrow cheap yen and pour that capital into higher-yielding U.S. treasuries, European bonds. As the BOJ normalizes rates, those institutions will be incentivized to bring that capital home.
And if that happens too fast,
it could cause a sudden, severe liquidity shock in U.S. and European bond markets, a powerful global drag.
Okay, let's zoom out and synthesize this. We started with the strong, forward-looking face AI U.S. growth, but we've identified 4 major asymmetric fragilities.
Right. The U.S. jobless boom and inequality, the colossal AI ROI gap, geopolitical fragmentation with the tariffs, and then these financial risks from the debt wall and opaque private credit.
The takeaway for you is clear. While the headlines suggest a smooth ride, the risks are heavily weighted to the downside.
The probability of a hard landing, triggered by a private credit event or a geopolitical miscalculation over China and Iran, is significantly higher than current market pricing reflects.
Our sources clearly prioritize these scenarios. They rate a private credit liquidity crunch as high probability, geopolitical stagflation from the tariffs is medium-high, and the French sovereign debt crisis is a solid medium probability.
These are known risks, but the market seems to be ignoring the compounded effect. The Janus face of fragility disguised as stability is fully exposed once you look past the S&P 500 and into those structural cracks.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, in terms of the bigger picture? What's the final provocative thought here?
We've spent all this time talking about economics, about finance, but the deepest structural risk, it may actually be social. The sources we read explicitly link the concentration of wealth, that K-shaped recovery, and the affordability crisis, the vibe session to rising social and political polarization.
Meaning the stability of the economy depends on something that's outside the typical financial models.
Exactly. The question you need to consider is this: how long can the immense benefits of this AI-driven Goldilocks economy be so aggressively concentrated among the few, before the resulting social unrest and political volatility driven by things like high prices and populist tariffs force an economic hard landing? The economic fate of the world in 2026 may ultimately depend on whether social cohesion breaks before that massive AI investment finally pays off.